Well, this is an exciting moment for me, a special moment for me. Welcome, Riane, to the Leaders Who Care series.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you.
No, it's an honor to have you on. They say in LA that you should leave them wanting with more so you can do a sequel, basically. And I definitely think there's no way we fit all this into 30, 35 minutes, but it's a good start to what we want to do. So, how about we do start with if you could briefly introduce yourself, more about initially about where you're from, where you are, family, maybe something you've never told anybody in the world you want to reveal now. Who knows?
Well, my name is Riane Eisler. I am a writer. I am the president of the Center for Partnership Systems, the editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies, etc., etc., etc. And I was born in Vienna, in Austria, and I had a pretty unremarkable early childhood. But when after the Anschluss, after the Austria joined the German Nazis, my world suddenly really, really radically changed in a very traumatic way. And my parents and I, actually, I was a child refugee from the Holocaust. And we were very fortunate that we escaped with our lives. And I grew up in Cuba, one of the few places where you could purchase entry permits if you were a refugee from Nazi Europe. And I grew up actually in the industrial slums of Havana. Even after my parents got up on their feet, they saw Cuba as a kind of a interim place before we could come to the promised land, to the United States. And I very early, I had to ask myself questions that many of us, I'm sure many of our listeners have asked themselves. When we humans have such an enormous capacity for consciousness, for caring, for sensitivity, why has there been so much insensitivity, so much cruelty, so much destructiveness? Is it inevitable, or are there alternatives? And many years later, of course, my interdisciplinary cross-cultural research was precisely designed to answer these questions. And the answer stemming from this whole systems multidisciplinary research is very definitely there is an alternative, but we can't see it through the lenses that we're conventionally used in our comfort zones to using. So I'll stop there because I've gone on for a while and
No,
let you ask the next question, Mark.
no, that was amazing. You kind of remind me of. I'm sure you've heard of Viktor Frankl.
Yes,
Um,
of course.
and what's the search for meaning? How you can always find meaning in everything. Basically, that's a whole other conversation too, naturally. But incredible. So as a kid, you had a different you had a different kid life, if you will. Were you then a big reader? Did you have any music or sports? What were you like as a kid or a teenager?
Well, I always was a big reader. Um, and really, there was a lending library in Havana, and I would go, and I wasn't really very supervised. So very early, I read a lot of the classics, the Russian classics, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, uh, some of the philosophical works, although I really didn't quite understand much of anything. But yes, and no, the sports. My parents, being Jewish, the big thing. My mother found what jewelry she should get out, sold it to send me to private schools so I would get the best possible education. And their idea of sports was walking in the courtyard. So I never really, but to this day, I walk a lot. I try to walk about 2 miles a day. And I live in a rather beautiful place. So it's green and that keeps me going. I eventually, as you know, went to law school on my way out of my first marriage, and found it with that, being an attorney, the first women's center on the West Coast, the Los Angeles. At that time, I lived in Los Angeles. Los Angeles Women's Center. I founded the first program on women in the law. And at that time, people would look at you sort of, what? What are you talking about? I mean, we took these discriminatory laws so for granted. And it was really like waking up from a long, drugged sleep, along with thousands of other women, of course. And so I really started to slowly go back to the questions of my childhood. And I also, my first job, it was sort of I won't go into all the details, was as a systems scientist for an offshoot of the Rand Corporation. And there I learned something at a time when systems thinking and the systems analysis was just, what are you talking about again?
Right.
I learned to really use this approach. And then, of course, came through my late husband, who was wonderful, David Loy. And he, through him, I really learned an awful lot more. And I became very much of an interdisciplinary scholar. And my first book, as you know, out of this research, I had written 2 other books before then. One on no-fault divorce, Marriage and the Future of Women, called Dissolution, Dissolution. It's still available and it's still applicable. And the other one, of course, was on the Equal Rights Amendment, the Equal Rights Handbook, which also was a mass paperback endorsed by Alan Alda and, all of these people, but was too late and the ERA failed. And that really drove me back to the questions of my childhood, because I realized that until then, every constitutional amendment had broadened protection. And this was the first time that it failed, and it failed to protect nothing less than half of the population.
Right.
I mean, that was huge. So anyway, I embarked on this, and the first book out of it, as I said, was The Chalice and the Blade.
Before you get into that, because I want to talk about that. You started a practice that was, to your point, researching kind of like the interaction between law and society. Where was the light bulb for that?
Well, it didn't really take much of a light bulb, frankly. I mean, I taught, as a matter of fact, at UCLA, the first courses on women and the social and legal status of women, and then also through the UCLA anthropology department, the social and legal status of women and children. And of course, it became very clear to me that the story that we've been taught about what it means to be human, about our past, our present, and the possibilities for our future was, shall we say, a rather edited story.
You think?
To fit a particular social system.
Right. So I want to get into all that and not miss it. So we actually founded our firm on the basis that leaders and businesses can actually do way better when they're doing good at the same times. And you co-founded the Center for Partnership Studies as a public service organization. We're a public benefit corp, similar, dedicated to research and education. I'm going to quote now, for cultural transformation from domination to partnership systems. And we'll talk more about partnerships in a minute, but you shared with me that we need new thinking, not endless posturing about capitalism versus socialism or whatever it may be, the title stuff, and that we are where we are because we use GDP as the measure of our progress, not that we could do so much better with the social wealth index. Can you elaborate on that part?
Well, that's quite a lot in one
I know.
question, but I'll do my best. First of all, we've inherited our conventional social and economic categories, right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, capitalist, socialist, from more rigid domination times, domination-oriented times. And it's really a problem because, number one, there have been terribly regressive, violent regimes, if you think about it, in every one of these conventional categories. So
Right.
none of them really tell us what we have to build for a more sustainable, equitable, caring future. Number two, and this was a light bulb, okay? Because we have all been taught that the more education, in fact, that we have, the more we believe this, that, yeah, you know, women, anything concerning women, anything concerning children, the majority of humanity, really, they're
Right.
just ancillary, women's issues, children's issues. Now, we today know from neuroscience, as a matter of fact, that what children experience or observe in the first 5 years of their lives, and this is, of course, also a gender issue, because caring for children, educating young children is, quote, coded feminine, right? Associated with women. That's actually affects nothing less than how our brains are developed. Our brains develop in interaction with our environments, which for humans are mostly cultural, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to make a very long story short, it became very clear that I could not answer the questions of my childhood and the questions for our future, really, by using these old categories or by using the old social studies. I mean, I woke up one day as if from a long drug sleep to realize at that time that in all my years of so-called higher education, there had been hardly anything by, about, or for people like me, women, much less children. In fact, modern science, as the historian of science David Noble writes, really came out of a clerical, misogynist, all male. As the title of his book is A World Without Women, and I would add a world without children. So, yes, this is a whole systems approach.
Yeah, I love it, and we'll get to the book there in a minute. I definitely like the new way of thinking, and you're right. In every system, there's been that problem, and one's not necessarily better than the other. In that, and they say that the fourth industrial revolution is about AI and tech and VR and all that, but the infamous they, also say that the fifth industrial revolution is about humanity, and we try to focus on the intersection of impact and talent and how important that is for results. I want to ask you two questions related to that. So you're obviously well known for your monumental book, The Chalice and the Blade, and that was all about transforming organizations, policies, and practices from, again, that dominating structure to a shared partnership. Can you share how this absolutely requires inclusion of diverse perspectives, identifying the root causes, obviously equal opportunity for collaboration? This isn't rocket science, I'm saying, but it's not necessarily easy to do, towards a common goal. And one thing I've always found is it's and not just about the political agenda and your point, and you're sticking to it and whatnot. Can you share, about that and what you were getting across in that book?
Well, what I get across in all my books, and this is also a theme of both the philosophy on which the Center for Partnership Systems, we changed the name from Studies to Systems because that's what it's about,
Right.
is all about, and what the tools that we've developed, like the Partnership Technology Toolkit or the Caring and Connected Parenting Guide. We really have to look at the whole system if we're going to understand not only what has been happening. I'll give an example.
Sure.
We tend to think of modern history as this sort of disconnected, well, I mean, mostly it's these, big people who have conquered or wars or what have you. But actually, if you use the lens of the partnership domination social scale, you see that it has consisted, as the Industrial Revolution destabilized things and got more and more and more into high gear, of one progressive movement after another, challenging entrenched traditions of domination. The same thing, countered by enormous resistance and periodic regressions. For example, the 1700s, there was the so-called rights of man movement, challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of kings to rule their subjects. Then came, of course, also the abolitionists and the civil rights, and today the Black Lives Matter movement, challenging the anti-colonial movement, challenging the so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over, quote, inferior ones. The feminists and the women's liberation, and then the women's movement, which is, global now, challenge another so-called divinely ordained tradition of domination of men to rule over women and children in the, quote, castles, of their homes, the military metaphor, all the way to the environmental movement, challenging the once hallowed, idealized conquest and domination of nature, which at our level of technological development, of overpopulation, is about to do us in unless we act. Now, the problem is that all of these movements have really focused on dismantling the top of the domination pyramid, politics and economics as conventionally defined. And they've left intact really 4 foundational elements on which regression after regression has kept rebuilding itself. Childhood and family is one of them, for the reason that I just said. We've known it from psychology, now we know it from neuroscience, how important really for how we think, how we act, how we vote. Our environments, our subcultures, our cultures mediated through families, education, religion, etc., are. The second one is gender, and we have a hidden system of gendered values in which anything coded feminine is considered inferior, along with women, to anything coded masculine, and I can get back to that. Then there's economics in my book, The Real Wealth of Nations, which I really hope that you will read, because it applies this thinking to, because we need new thinking, as I always emphasize, Einstein said it, you can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them. It's a very simple thing. All right, so economics, I introduce in that book a new economics that takes the partnership elements of both capitalism and socialism, government and markets, but takes it further to what I call a caring economics of partnerism, in which the work for caring for people starting at birth and caring for a natural life support system takes absolute priority. And I can get back to that. And the fourth, of course, and they're all interconnected, is story and language. We've been told false stories. I mean, there was a long, long period in our prehistory when millions of years, really going back to our early foraging societies, and the data they're there. The science is there. I mean, this is a very empirically based conclusion. They oriented more to the partnership side, not ideal, but for example, Çatalhöyük, which is an early farming settlement. According to the archaeologists that's excavated there, the size of the houses, the so-called grave goods, show no signs of difference. There are no signs of destructions through warfare for over 1,000 years. And yes, as Ian Hodder, the archaeologist who excavated Çatalhöyük for many years, there are no signs that being born female or male made any difference in status or position. So we've been told a false story about, quote, human nature, which is debunked in my latest book, which came out with Oxford University Press in 2019, Nurturing Our Humanity, really details that how domination and partnership, which is the subtitle, Domination and Partnership, how domination and partnership shape our brains, lives, and future.
So you gave me the perfect segue there. Thank you for that. That's the best guest ever that does that. In that, well, first I want to say, there's been so many studies, because we're kind of in this business of impact and talent, that have clearly shown that what fills people's hearts and souls more than anything is belonging. And it doesn't talk about males belonging or females belonging or anybody belonging. It's just belonging. And it could be a family, it could be your department in your company, it could be in your community. And it's not somebody leading that belonging, it's everybody belonging type of thing. And your book, which I'm starting to go through them. I don't know how fast I can read all of them, but I'm starting to go through them. You kind of guide us on an amazing journey on how children develop their humanity, as you said, through the Montessori lens and a global perspective. And in my experience, dealing with corporate leaders and other leaders around the world, is everybody comes home from work, whether your spouse, your spouses, or your partner, they come home from work, and they either say, "Oh man, I'm so tired. Work was terrible. My boss sucks. I don't even know what we're doing there," and the kids hear that. Or you come home and you say, "Hey guys, I got to tell you about this. Let's have dinner. I want to tell you about what I achieved at work and how my boss said about it." And everybody loved it. And they joined in as a team. And apparently next week we're going to do some stuff in food security or whatever that I'm really excited about. And the kids hear that. So to your point, as simple as an example that is, the kids are impacted just by that alone, about what it's like to work at a company or your own business or whatever. So can you address that a little bit from your book and tell us why that is so important as a foundation? And it's about caring, which is, by the way, is why we have this Leaders Who Care series. When we first started, people saying care, that's kind of intimate for business and whatnot, but people want to work with leaders who really do care. So can you just chat about that a bit?
Well, I'll start with what you said at the end. Care has been coded feminine, right?
Right.
One of the partnership trends that are happening in bits and pieces, but we needed an integrated, really coherent movement now, is that, yes, that men and even men who lead corporations are beginning to think about care. And the data are there. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science background to understand that if people feel cared for, they are going to make sure that the company that they work for is successful. Right. If they have meaningful work. I mean, what do we humans want? We want to belong, and that is a two-edged sword, by the way.
It is.
Because if you want to belong, say, to a subculture that is all into blame and shame and punishment,
Right.
that's how, and if that's how you were brought up. Now, the good news, and I know I'm not quite answering your question, but in a way
Good.
I am, I think.
Yeah.
The good news is we can change at any point in our lives. But we do know, as you said, that what children experience and observe in their, especially in their first 5 years, when our brains are really forming in interaction with our, I mean, this is neuroscience. This is not, and yet we still have this notion that we are in human nature is greedy and, rape and greed and violence. They're built-in nonsense. We learn what is considered normal. I mean, if children grow up in a household, for example, where violence, spanking, is used as a means of violence, as a means of discipline. If children grow up in a household, for example, where violence like spanking is used as a means of discipline, they learn that, hey, it's okay, it's even moral to use violence to impose your will on others by those who are stronger, bigger, have more power. And of course, I really have to say this. There are hierarchies in both partnership and domination systems, but I've made a distinction between, you have to coin new words, between a hierarchy of domination, we all know this, top down, fear-based, etc., whether in the family or in the workplace or whatever, or hierarchies of actualization, where power is empowering. Now, the mere fact that we now have a word like empowering is, again, a partnership trend. But we have to really learn from those pushing us back that we need an integrated agenda focusing on these 4 foundational pieces.
Yeah,
well, I wanted to say this, but I'll stop for a moment.
No, please continue. Please go.
Okay. Well, look, again, it's based on observation, on knowledge. Whether it's Putin in the former Soviet Union, in Russia, Khomeini in Iran, religious, secular, Eastern or Western, Hitler in Nazi Germany, Stalin in the former Soviet Union, ISIS, the rightist fundamentalist alliance, so-called, in the United States. If you really watch what they focus on, these so-called social issues, look at the 4 cornerstones here. They focus on family. Oh my gosh, I mean, look at DeSantis right now. All of this parental rights, the right to control what children learn, whether it's true or false, it doesn't matter. They have the right to control it. Gender, why do you think really that whether it's for the Taliban or for Stalin or for Hitler, I mean, or the rightist fundamentalist alliance, maintaining or imposing a rigidly male-dominated, authoritarian, punitive family is a top priority. You know that in 2018, Putin substantially reduced the penalty for family violence.
Yeah, it's amazing how these things happen so often without anybody noticing. Even here in the States, they happen without people noticing, and it just takes a little bit of time. It's interesting. I had because I think not only, but I think it's really up to a lot of the leaders of corporates and people in business to really make a lot of this change happen. in a positive way and to think differently. I interviewed a CEO a while back that said he's having the best time and being the most effective that he's ever been in his life. He's allowed to show emotion. He's allowed to not pretend he knows everything. He's allowed to trust people to get stuff done. And he's loving it, basically. And he cares. And what they realized is if they don't care, number one, they don't get the best talent, because the young talent coming up, they want to make money, but not just make money. They want to care. They want to have purpose. They want to make an impact. And so it does have to be a movement. And some of that comes from insecurity. That dominance, I think, comes from insecurity of losing what they think they're losing, or the power they're losing.
Well, I think that you have to have very rigid gender stereotypes in domination systems, because how else are you going to rank one type of human form, the male form, over another human form? You know, there are these two basic human forms, the male form and the female form. And with it comes this hidden system of gendered values. Now, both capitalism and socialism, both Smith and Marx, I mean, for them, the work of caring, you know, coded feminine, right? Well, number one, caring for people, especially the young, but any, you know, sick, the elderly. Well, that was to be done by a woman for free in a male-controlled household. And
Right.
as for keeping a clean and healthy environment, not the natural environment, I mean, the home environment was women's work, but, you know, the natural environment, for them, nature was just there to be exploited, period.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing about caring for our natural environment. Now, GDP perpetuates this, so that the externalities are the three life-sustaining sectors. Think about that.
Mm-hmm.
The natural economy, the volunteer community economy, and the household economy. And of course, it's a ridiculous map of economics, and one that I challenge in the real wealth of nations, because, well, it leads to what we've got, a mess.
Yeah, a big mess. And well, I just want to let you know, I do eat quiche, and I do cry, and all the stuff that's feminine, apparently, and all that stuff. And I know other leaders that do it too. I want to ask you, because we'll definitely have to have a sequel, but I do want to ask you this. We were launched on International Women's Day 5 years ago because we do a lot in diversity. And everything we do, whether it's a search for an executive or an impact project or whatnot. Can you describe a little bit? You kind of have, to some degree, your feelings, your journey as a woman over all these times that we've talked about, you know, and from the background you came from, to how you navigated and thrived to do anything during all that period.
Well, you know, we are in a period when there is this struggle between the movement towards the partnership side, and it is a configuration, as you have by now seen, that starts with not only what kind of structure we have in politics and in economics, but in the family.
Sure.
And that where gender is a very important component, and where violence and abuse are really built into domination system, because how else are you going to maintain man over man, man over woman, race over race, religion over religion, etc., etc.? You have to have it. Yes, there is some violence also in partnership systems, but it doesn't have to be built in to the system. And of course, the stories and the language are very different. So this all really has a lot to do with our own individual lives. And the fact that so many men are like you and like some of your guests are really challenging the stereotypical view, you know, that being a real man, well, it's not being like a woman, right? So, you know, you have to be tough, caring, caregiving, nonviolence, they're coded feminine, and I don't want anything to do with it. But, you know, as you see in, for example, the Northern European nations like Finland or Norway or Sweden or Denmark, as these nations, not coincidentally, by the way, have about 40 to 50% of their national legislatures are female.
Right.
Not all women. I mean, this has nothing really to do, because women look how many women call a caring man a sissy, right?
Right.
I mean, we've internalized it.
We have the Marlboro man with the cigarette on top of the horse, if you remember him.
I certainly do. Oh my God, do I remember it?
What was fascinating about that, not to get too off topic, Marlboro used to be a quote unquote women's cigarette.
Yes.
And it wasn't working, so they switched it to the tough man on the horse, and it worked just to sell the cigarette. Yeah, it's it's interesting because I had worked with one company for a while and about leaders who care. They thought it was great, but then they finally said, I don't know if we can do this caring thing. And I said, well, if you're having a problem with the word care, you're going to go crazy when I start using the word love. I don't know what you're going to do then, basically. So we're going to have to definitely do a sequel. But I do want to ask you this last question on this part. A client told me in 2021, a client said, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a great way to describe it. And the last 3 years have been, to say the least, interesting would be an understatement. Can you share with us what you're most grateful for and also what you're most hopeful for?
Well, I am grateful that for my family. I'm grateful for the 45 years, wonderful years that I spent with my wonderful partner, David Loy, who's gone, and I miss him terribly, but I try look, I mean, I've lived a long time. You can see from my white hair.
Well, I don't even have anything white hair to show. What are you talking about?
But I'm grateful that I get to do meaningful work, and that what I really want more than anything else right now, because you asked me about hope for the future, and it really depends on us, on what we do. And like those pushing us back who have an integrated agenda, integrating the economic, what is trickle down economics, for goodness sakes? It's not capitalism. It could be a Chinese emperor or an Indian sheik or pasha or Arab sheik. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Or a feudal lord, where those on bottom content themselves with the scraps falling from the opulent tables of those on top. I mean, that we have to understand. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are going to be some differences in status and in wealth, but what we have in the United States is obscene, really. I mean, we have to have more equality. We have to have more diversity, but diversity alone is not enough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we bring this out in our toolkit, which really focuses on these 4 cornerstones, as well as the environment, as well as racism, which is in-group versus out-group thinking, whether it's anti-Semitism or whether it's racism, whether it's Shia versus Sunni or Sunni versus Shia, it doesn't really matter. It's built into this punitive enemy mentality of blaming and shaming and punishing the other.
And I think forcing dependency also.
And forcing dependency. Thank you for bringing that up, because really, women are a very good example of this, because we really are just beginning to realize how valuable our work, this so-called women's work of caring and caregiving is. But the thing about it is that to use a woman's metaphor, we don't want a bigger piece of the existing pie. We want to bake a better pie, a better family, social, economic pie.
And
we're moving in that direction with enormous resistance, and periodic regressions. That's why we need this integrated agenda, and we need to pay particular attention to these four foundations, the cornerstones: childhood and family, gender, economics, but moving to a caring economics of partnerism, and story and language.
Well, that's a great way to complete here. And I'll just add one thing. I remember this interview I saw where they asked a couple, do you want to have more kids? And one of the couples said, I don't know how we're going to split the love with another one. And the other one said, you just get more love when that happens. You don't split it. So there's hope for that. And I'm super grateful that I hope I can call you a friend and a leader who does care. I really appreciate, the knowledge you bring us and the hope that you bring us as well. So thank you for joining us on this series. And if it's up to me, there's definitely going to be a sequel. That's for sure. So thank you so much.
I thank you, Mark, and I look forward to a sequel. We can talk about many things, and we can talk about what each of us can do and needs to do.
I'm with you. Thanks.
Thank you.